So, just to reiterate, I thank you for your attendance here today. I have to say, Mr. Swinney had read my speech, and I don't think he was very happy with some of the content here, as he alluded to in his comments. I mean, I find that I do like listening to John Swinney, and I think he says a lot of right things, but it's all a bit ambiguous. It's a bit ambivalent. So, I mean, with that in mind, I'm going to start my speech. So, like I had mentioned earlier, I'd like to extend a warm and heartfelt fraternal greeting to our friends and comrades, for our fellow unions, and to the members of the press who are in attendance. Furthermore, I implore any politician, although he's left, who is here as a guest. It's funny, he never waits for the speech, does he? Anyway, is here as a guest of the association, to please listen carefully to what we are saying. It's in places like this, and at the coming EIS AGM, for example, that you will hear the voices of the experts, not at parliamentary committees, not at panels of academics or stakeholders, because, and I think Seamus made an important point in his small address there, that we are no stakeholders, we are partners. Without us, there is no education system, so it's slightly insulting to be called a stakeholder, because we're not just an interested party. We are the education system. So I refuse to accept being called a stakeholder, and you should do likewise when your Heidi refers to you as a stakeholder. Or even at the OECD, I'm sick of being quoted OECD figures. Seamus and I were there the other week, and basically it's a capitalist club that deigns to tell us their plans for the next 5 years and how they're going to be affecting our lives. And I'm not really interested in what they're saying, to be quite honest. Or even, and dare I say it, Education Scotland or the Regional Improvement Collaboratives. But here, at congresses or unions like this, where the profession gathers to discuss the situation as it really is, and uses the combined weight of, and this isn't an insult, what I assume to be hundreds of years of experience and practice to evaluate what is best for Scotland's children and for the professionals who will deliver Scotland's future. Most importantly, however, I'd like to welcome our delegates, you, as selected by your districts from across the length and breadth of Scotland. For me, you and our sister unions representatives are the most important people in any school, for it is you who have decided to put your efforts into safeguarding the working conditions of your colleagues, and it is you who is helping to build the best educational environment, often at odds with some of the ridiculous ideas of our bosses, for our young people. Colleagues, even the not so observant amongst you will have noticed this year's strapline, Teaching Scotland's Future. And there's actually a wee story there, because we sat at standing orders one day, racking our brains, coming up with all sorts of grandiose titles like, I don't know, Scotland's Children, Putty in Our Hands, and all this sort of rubbish. And it was actually Laura Young in the office who came up with, well, why not just go with Teaching Scotland's Future? And that encapsulates really everything that we are attempting to do. So well done, Laura, for cutting through all the garbage for people like us. You know. So anyhow, now, that in itself sounds a bit grandiose, but it is exactly what we are doing, and we are doing it in a climate in which I feel aspects of that future are under dire threat. The world in which we live in is becoming ever more precarious. Democracy, as we experience it, is, in my opinion, under siege. We are seeing the rise across the planet of unethical, amoral, and downright disgusting political opportunism and right-wing neoliberal populism. And I find it interesting these days in the media that they no longer call right-wing thuggery and scummery for what it is. They call it populism. Now, I don't understand that. It's a disguise, and it's a deliberate attempt to pull the wool over our eyes. Populism, that means nothing to me. It's right-wing thuggery that we're having to deal with here, so let's call it what it is. Where am I? Anyway, our rights as citizens are being eroded on a continual basis. The little democracy we are allowed, and remember, this democracy was fought for and won through the blood and sweat of our trade union forebears, is gradually being scraped away layer by layer. A good example of this being that in one of the days of the absurd bickering in the House of Commons about Brexit, and again in inverted commas, I'm going to do this a lot, the government slipped in under the radar the cutting by up to 25% a housing benefit for people who just happen to have a spare room. Now that went almost completely unreported. And now that I've mentioned that, we just can't get rid of the ongoing nonsense of Brexit, with the uncertainty that it brings in the platform that either intentionally or unintentionally gives xenophobes and racists. I find it strange that I'm able to quote, or rather paraphrase, of all people, a comedian, Frankie Boyle, whom, and this is another true story, I tried to persuade Seamus and Alan to invite Frankie Boyle as the guest speaker, but it was like the tumbleweed moment in Seamus's office, and they just weren't having it. But Glasgow's own son, Frankie Boyle, whom I happened to watch on the TV whilst I was at the UTU conference a few weeks ago, asking why it is that our media allows xenophobes and racists a platform for which to spew their repugnancy as if they actually had a rational and valid argument. And it's absolutely true. And remember, this is the same media that is creating the springboard by which, and I say this with absolute conviction, the enemies of mankind, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson, can launch their vile views upon our people in their attempts to become Prime Minister of the UK. Colleagues, if this happens, we should prepare for the very worst. Rees-Mogg and Johnson have articulated with unashamed clarity that the first thing to go after Brexit is workers' rights. Both of these men and their party in general actively want to return this country to the Victorian era, and they want workers kept in their place as slaves to their masters, i.e. them. Rees-Mogg is a right-wing hardliner who in the past has shared speeches for the German far-right AfD on his Twitter account. He is a disaster capitalist who makes millions for people's misery. Johnson is an aristocratic thug and a chauvinist to the worst hue. This pair's views are not exactly underrepresented amongst Tories. But colleagues, this isn't just a general rant. The Tories are the sworn enemy of the trade unions and of the majority of the children we teach. Look at what they have done to the education system in England. They have literally destroyed it. Rampant privatisation has led to the complete erosion of any semblance of a unified comprehensive system. Schools are operating without qualified staff, the rise of religious fundamentalist schools of all stripes, grammar schools and academies. On top of this, management bully and utterly contemptible performance-related pay structures, which are solely based on whether the boss likes you. The ongoing atomisation of the comprehensive system in England makes it very difficult for our sister unions to effectively organise and negotiate at a national level. To us, the English system may seem a million miles away, but colleagues, we must be vigilant. There are many characters in Scotland who want to enact the same crime here. To them, our charges are nothing more than fodder for their slave shops and their wars. But colleagues, the Tories don't need Brexit for any of the aforementioned, but the Brexit debacle will have further negative impacts on our profession. As mentioned, the Tories are already planning an all-out offensive in the working people of this country, and that will include teachers. We are already seeing in Scotland that some of our co-workers from EU countries are electing to leave as Brexit either affects them or members of their families. We are seeing that the number of applicants to come into our profession from the EU are falling. This is criminal. And talking of criminality, the GTCS are also rightly concerned about the loss of the database through which they check for criminal records for EU applicants. They fear a return to a hit-and-miss approach to finding this information out, as it will then be a case of relying on the law enforcement agencies of the applicants' countries of origin responded with the required info. And I only know this because I'm on the GTC Council and Ken Muir has mentioned it several times. The point is, of course, the people most negatively affected shall be the pupils in our classrooms who could be going without a teacher because we have allowed small-minded bigotry and parochialism to manoeuvre our country into this position. Our children welcome diversity. It opens their minds to how other people live and how they may in future choose to live. We need to oppose this and call on the Scottish Government to take concrete action against anything that reduces the horizon towards which the vast majority of our children gaze. Now, comrades, I don't know about you, but for me, this has been a slog of a year. As is perennially the case, we have been involved in a three-way battle with our bosses. And John Swinney's absolutely right. When you look at the history of the organisation, it is the same things that are constantly coming up, which makes you wonder why they don't just sort it out. But anyway, These three issues that have plagued the profession since their inception, and at this, our Association's 75th Congress, we are talking about the same issues as we did at the first. Fair enough. I'm sure there was also a lot of talk about why the association even had to exist in the first place, but nevertheless, I'd be prepared to bet that these things were also on the agenda. And these three things are, of course, pay, workload, and pupil behaviour. However, everything is relative, and I'm positive that every single one of you would agree that we are suffering from historically unmanageable workloads and behaviour, and that in these fronts we've yet to score any sort of major victory whatsoever. Colleagues, we need to be committed to changing that. But as an aside, I was looking through a document for our archives and found an article in a magazine we produced at the time. This magazine was highlighting issues with growing pupil and discipline, much like I'm going. However, the reasons cited here made me laugh out loud. And this was like the 50s. At the time, the causes of our young people's unwillingness to do what they're bloody well told was thought to revolve around them listening to subversive music on Satan's wireless and watching innocence-destroying and culturally damaging movies at the cinema. Which made me think to myself, what, musicals and westerns? Because that's all I ever remember seeing on the television when I was growing up. But anyway, fair enough, it was the 50s, but it makes you wonder what the reasons would have been a few years later in the 60s. Anyway, this year did see a major victory for our union. The stalwart determination of and the partnership between the SSTA and the EIS has resulted in the 10% break in pay deal. But colleagues, this didn't just happen. Our profession mobilised in this issue on a scale scarcely seen in Scottish trade union history. 30,000 teachers, their families and supporters took to the streets of Glasgow to demand their just due. Anyone who was there that day should never forget that they were a part of trade union history. To be able to look behind you at any point and see what appears to be a never-ending procession of thousands upon thousands of your brothers and sisters receding into the distance, and the same in front, was for me awe-inspiring. As soon as my wife and I entered Kelvingrove Park and saw the number of people already gathered there, long before the match was to start, I knew we were in for something special. And colleagues, what an occasion that was. Some of you will have been there. We have to give credit to our comrades in arms in the EIS for their fantastic efforts in getting that march organised and ensuring the mobilisation of their membership. However, the success of the pay campaign wasn't just down to the march in Glasgow that day. The numbers turning out to demonstrate were as high as they were because we simply have had enough. The level of anger and frustration teachers are feeling then and now is palpable. We can't take any more. We already know that we can't get people in, that people are leaving, and that those of us determined to stay are increasingly finding it difficult to remain, but even though it just keeps getting worse. I mean, Mr. Swinney can talk about looking for the positives, and there obviously are many positives happening in the Scottish education system, but I would imagine, like me, these positives are clouded on an hourly basis, day by day, by the issues that we are trying to address here. And until these issues are sorted, well, I'm sorry, the positives just don't make it to the top of the agenda for me. Whilst talking to members over the last year or so, it is evident that the pay issue was not the foremost issue, or at least was only one amongst the other issues that are making our job so very difficult. Colleagues, and this is the bit John Swinney didn't like, Curriculum for Excellence, whilst utterly laudable in its principles, has been, in its implementation, an absolute nightmare for our profession. It has been from the start a half-arsed, half-baked hodgepodge of semi-rational notions of pedagogical rationales and curricular inconsistencies. At virtually no point in its history has our profession been fully consulted in its ideological underpinnings, curricular necessities, or implementation. Indeed, at every turn the voice of teachers has been ignored. Why? Is it because on some level the bureaucrats in charge realised that we would recognise the contradictions between what they said it should be and what it turned out to actually be? Is it because they see us as wreckers who would upset their plans by insisting on a well thought out and joined up strategy? Or is it because they know we would see the insidious culture of ever-increasing workloads implicit in the wholesale removal of one system to be replaced with another, having had zero groundwork put in? Colleagues, they wanted it all, and they wanted it yesterday. It was never going to work. They blazed on regardless, knowing, indeed expecting that we would carry the burden, that we would just not go down and get on with it. The thing is, we have. We are the reason that the education system in Scotland isn't a complete shambles. Some may argue it is, but nevertheless, we continue to spend unthinkable volumes of time and effort in trying to make this system work. Comrades, we need to say enough is enough. Our health, our families and our sanity should be worth more than sorting out the mess that our education system is in. We have to say no. We have to take action. Shane, we should be well sitting down while we're pausing for applause. That's all right. We have to take action to reduce the workload. We have to resist the culture that insists on constantly redesigning the wheel, constantly wanting to rework what we are already doing, constantly wants to codify our responsibilities and erode our professionalism. Resist the bureaucratic insistence on handing us down our instructions from on high in the form of Hygieos. Comrades, in Northern Ireland, as part of their ongoing industrial action, they've refused to interact with their version of Education Scotland. This has led to teachers taking back their power to decide what's best for the young people in front of them, and has led to the removal of fear from managers to ensure that they have all their silly checklists and their concertina folders completed. It has removed the need to micromanage staff and the angst that they may not be meeting one of the quality indicators. Incidentally, the drive for the recording of evidence in every aspect of a child's ability and the fear of not having that evidence, in my opinion, is leading to a burgeoning culture of management bullying in our schools. It absolutely does. And to be fair to head teachers, it's because they themselves are being bullied by their managers. But colleagues, for our Irish friends, the result is more time to just get on with what they're good at, teaching. We know the implementation of CFE was poorly thought out and enacted, but we are several years down the line now and the issues just aren't being resolved. Our school structures cannot meet the demands that the curriculum places upon them. The desire to offer pupils everything when they want it and how they want it just can't work. I'd like to ask if there is anyone in this room that works at a school where the timetable isn't in some way or another making their job harder than it needs to be. Isn't this because it is impossible to deliver the demands being placed upon it? There just aren't the resources. There aren't enough teachers or rooms. There also isn't the experience among senior staff to be able to design the parameters within which this can all be delivered. No wonder. Who would? This inevitably leads to the situation where a teacher has to contend with multi-course classes, split classes, sharing rooms, lack of resources, oversubscribed classes, reducing teaching commitments for BGE classes, etc., etc. You all know this just means more work for us. My own local authority, through my constant raging and ranting about it, just to shut me up for 5 minutes, recently conducted a survey of teachers to try and understand how timetabling affects workload. The results were incontrovertible and overwhelming. Teachers in huge numbers cite timetabling as being a prominent reason for increased workload. The level of planning involved due to timetable and shortfalls becomes onerous and unmanageable. How can learning and teaching and thus attainment be made better in these circumstances? Add to that continual, still, changes to the curriculum, a lack of clarity and exposition regarding assessment arrangements, constant cover demands, the need to find time to try and understand and implement your responsibilities around GovFec and inclusion, constantly having to negotiate subject levels with kids and managers, having to pick up the pieces from inappropriate subject level choices, i.e. everybody doing every level and every unit, ever reducing budgets, the demands of tracking and monitoring, report writing and parents' nights, and of course all the other things that I haven't mentioned, of which there will no doubt be hunters, and the situation becomes clear. Comrades, we are being asked, no forced, to do an impossible job. It cannot be done. Of course, ultimately, it is the children of Scotland who will suffer, are already suffering, when they don't get the time they require with their teacher, and when the teacher doesn't get the time they need to do their jobs. Now, this takes me to my next topic, which I can see that the papers seem to have picked up on this morning. Colleagues, as mentioned earlier, if you were to peruse the history of our association, you wouldn't be long in finding complaints about behaviour. Obviously, wherever children are involved, there are going to be issues with how they behave. We have to accept that there are elements of being a teenager that just aren't going to go away. Rebelliousness, for instance, is, in my opinion, a good thing. Teenagers should question what they are told by adults. How else do they develop independent thought? They should be able to consider the situation, weigh up the pros and cons of it, and how it relates to them and what they want or need. However, I would argue that the present situation in our schools has gone way beyond such innocent personality building. In recent surveys conducted by the association, it can be seen that over 70% of you are being affected by this on a regular basis. Colleagues, how many of you can say you have not been at least verbally abused just this week? For me, this verbal abuse ranks top of all stress-inducing factors in my job. Colleagues, there seems to be an expectation that we are to be subjected to the most foul abuse on a daily basis, often more than once in a day. Pupils are belligerent in the extreme in their use of language, very often violent, personalised, sexualised, homophobic and sexist, occasionally sectarian and racist. The latter two, though, in my experience, are rarer. Nonetheless, to be subjected to this sort of language on a continuous basis is damaging. It's damaging for morale, self-esteem and one's health. I suspect, however, even more damaging is the lack of support staff can expect from their managers. The lack of action taken against such individuals, or the perceived, sometimes open implication that somehow or another you were to blame for the situation, only makes it worse. Simply put, children are not to be accountable for their actions. Colleagues, how has this situation come to be? Are these children to be exempt from the laws of our country when they leave school? Do we want a society where no one answers for their actions? Do we want a society devoid of respect for others? To my mind, this sort of behaviour has slowly evolved over the course of the last 2 decades. It has worsened under the aegis of CFE. The nurture, or cuddle culture, and I see I'm really glad, because this is a phrase I use all the time and it winds the bosses up something rotten, but I see one of the paper's headlines was the cuddle culture, and I thought, I'll go into the next meeting with my local authority bosses and I'll probably get strung up for that, but it'll be worth it. But nonetheless, the nurture or cuddle culture stipulates that the child is to be at the centre of all aspects of education, a la Gurfek. As a progressive and a socialist, I've got no problem with this, in any way whatsoever. What I do have a problem with, and I suspect many of you do too, is with the notion that with the many rights a child has, and these rights must absolutely be upheld at all cost, is the direct result of how... I've missed a bit there. What have I done? Well, anyway, seem to have printed that out right. The notion being that these kids' rights are enshrined in law. They absolutely are. We have to uphold them. But where are their responsibilities? Is what that line should have said. This culture has led to the situation where a teacher almost has no authority over their charges. When attempting to maintain discipline in the classroom, a teacher can expect to be challenged in every instruction issued with cries of, "I don't need to do what you say, you've no right to tell me this," or even the tried and tested, "I'm getting my maw up here." This leads to an intolerable position of powerlessness for the teacher. When these issues are raised with PTs or guidance, there is often an extreme reluctance to resolve the power imbalance. These colleagues feel that they are in the same position of powerlessness. Why is this? I feel, and many won't appreciate hearing it, that the central issue lies with many teachers' ideas of how pupil support should operate within a school. The core concepts around the well-being of the child lead many to assume that this means they cannot or should not suffer a consequence for their actions. Most often you will be told about how awful their backgrounds are and of the many issues they have to deal with. Colleagues, I don't doubt it. I spoke at length last year about how many of our children are suffering from the health and social effects of the criminal level of poverty suffered by many people in our country. Indeed, I would argue the majority of people in our country. Child poverty is at its highest level in 20 years. However, are we doing our children any favours by allowing them to think that how they are treated at school is actually how they will be treated as adults? I don't think we are. Indeed, I think we are allowing our children to develop a seriously distorted idea of the society they will emerge into. In fact, we are creating for these children a complete fantasy. In the real world, they will be held accountable for their actions, be it in the workplace, within their communities, or in a court of law. It is critical that we impart to our pupils the need for discipline, especially self-discipline. We can argue about how best to achieve this, i.e. restorative approaches, de-escalation, whatever, but we must absolutely agree in the first instance that it must be accomplished. Our senior bosses in schools, local authorities and in the government must accept this. They need to empower our profession to take back control in our classrooms. As I've said, this revolves around the notion that with rights come responsibilities. In my opinion, you don't have the right to not have responsibilities. Also, as any probationer should know, children need boundaries. They want boundaries. Having boundaries makes it easier for everyone to know where they stand and what they are able to do or not do. We often hear about the right to an education, but should you continue to have that right when you are infringing upon the rights of your classmates to their education, or indeed when you're infringing upon the right of your teacher not to be verbally or physically abused? We need our bosses to support us and challenge pupils and parents' unacceptable behaviour. At the heart of many of these issues is inclusion. Colleagues, I'm not talking about inclusion as you or I might understand it or want it to mean, i.e. the notion that all children, regardless of any impediment, have the right to learn to the best of their ability in the same conditions as their peers or in the conditions that best suit their needs. I'm talking about inclusion in the world of austerity. The cuts to our education services since the calamitous worldwide crash of 2008 has led to an environment where almost all special educational needs establishments have been closed down. There is no longer specialised provision for children with acute behavioural needs or even for children with hearing or sight impairments. The services that remain extant are under constant threat. The funding, once in place for these services, has not followed the pupils into the mainstream. On top of this, the attacks on PSAs go on unremittingly. Our schools cannot function without these highly committed colleagues. And as a wee aside, a recent forum meeting in Fife, they showed us their most recent figures for assaults on members of staff, and PSAs were through the roof, way higher than for teachers. And interestingly, primary schools were through the roof as well, but we'll leave that to the EIS. Our schools cannot function without these highly committed colleagues. It is they who support these children through the most trying and difficult periods of their time in school. All of this is justified in terms of inclusion. Colleagues, it's a barefaced lie. This is the natural conclusion of the Tories' horrific and murderous attack on the people of this country. These cuts must be resisted with all our collective might. Comrades, I believe that in order to tackle the issues we face with workload and behaviour, we're going to need to tap into the anger and frustration I mentioned earlier in the speech. To do that is going to require every one of us stepping up our game. We need to be in our schools setting an example. We need to be leading our colleagues in these issues. We need to be the first person putting in the violent incident form, the pain in the arse demanding a pupil risk assessment, the troublemaker down at the head teacher's office demanding they take action around issues as they arise. We need to be in our departments reminding colleagues and PTs what our terms and conditions actually are and not what some may like them to be. We need to be in our LNCTs demanding our bosses take cognizance of our demands and make them take action. Zero tolerance posters in classrooms, receptions and staff rooms of our schools would be a start. Colleagues, we need to ensure we are doing our utmost to engage our members, organise regular meetings to discuss the issues, put out regular informational emails, share what comes out from the district and HQ. We need to organise to recruit new teachers, both students and probationers. We need our General Secretary and President kicking down John Swinney's door to demand he take action. You got your metal toe caps on, Seamus. Folk in my school often ask me for advice about this, that, and the next thing, and what they should do about various issues. Colleagues, more often than not, my answer is, say you're bloody well no doing it. Often enough, I think I may get it tattooed on my forehead. My colleagues often rib me asking, what does a union rep do anyway? I tell them I'm out putting my life on the line for their jobs. I'm joking, but there is an element of truth in that. Obviously, it's not the same union landscape in which courageous men and women have indeed given their lives over the course of the last 2 centuries, fighting for every single right we enjoy today, but we do need to be courageous. We need to take our fight to the bosses and demand action. We need to stand up to bullying and disrespectful behaviour from our bosses, parents or kids. We need to make our union an example to all teachers. If we do, we can make our jobs the life-affirming vocations they once were. We need to follow the old union maxim of organise, educate and agitate. Thank you.